Welcome to this new Tech Captains episode. I'm Ron, and today with Gareth, we are lucky to interview Sophie Davies-Patrick, who's worked at organizations like American Express or Yahoo in its golden years, and today is CTO in an organization of more than 500 people. Sophie, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you, Ron, and nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you are now CTO at MPB, like I said, an organization of more than 500 people, and that presents itself as the largest global platform to buy, sell, and trade used photo and video gear. And my first questions when I prepared this interview is to see that you started with a BA in archaeology and anthropology from Cambridge. How did you end up in tech?
So yes, anthropology was such a fascinating course. There's not many direct career paths from it, however, unless you want to stay in academia, which was not the right approach for me. I spoke actually to the career service at the university, and they ran me through a questionnaire asking me what I was interested in, and I had to score various things. It was fairly basic, but actually it's interesting. It suggested that I should become a software engineer, which is something I'd barely considered. And it suggested it because I was both quite technical. My A levels had been further maths, physics, all of those things, but also quite creative. I'd also done art A level, and it suggested it as a nice marriage between the two. And I actually remembered when this came up that in my school days, I enjoyed playing around on the BBC Micro and the kind of first computers that were there at the time. And I was like, yeah, I do actually enjoy coding. So this was, in the 90s where companies took you if you didn't have a software engineering degree, because there weren't many of them. And I was lucky enough to get a role there. And I really worked my way up through the industry. It was, still a small industry, and people who were capable of, communicating clearly and managing were prized. And so I was lucky enough to gain leadership roles, and it's been an absolutely fascinating journey. And just to bring it back to the anthropology, actually it is useful and is interesting, because I learned a lot about how societies work and people work. And I also studied primatology and evolution, so kind of the structured scientific side of how humans are driven. And I found that a lot of my subsequent career when I'm in leadership positions is really understanding how people work and how groups of people work. And once you understand that and you see it as a problem to be solved in the anthropological sense, actually you can have some quite interesting drivers. So yeah, it's been great. And then, finally, software being a global industry, I've been lucky enough to travel a lot. And again, my sort of anthropology training or interest early on, I think really equipped me for working with people all over the world and understanding and celebrating kind of diverse thoughts and diverse ways of thinking that you find in different countries. So yeah, it's although on paper it looks strange choice, actually it has all made sense.
No, that makes sense. No, that's very, very interesting. And I mentioned earlier that you worked at Yahoo 15 years ago, more or less, which were the golden years or closing towards the end of the golden years. So can you tell us a bit more about these years, and could you have foreseen what happens to Yahoo after?
Interesting. It was, absolutely right. That's a lovely way of putting it. It really was the golden years. So when I started there, Yahoo was still number one in search. So it seems relatively recent, but that was the case for the first few months I was there. But even over those first 2 months, it was dropping slightly. And Google was really seen as the young upstart. And could I have foreseen it? You know what? I remember thinking at the time, there was two factors that I observed. Now, the first one was that small startup companies naturally grow at a faster rate just due to the dynamics of a startup. And Yahoo by then was no longer a startup, but yet in financial terms, from Wall Street terms, was expected to grow as fast as the disruptors. And they never could, because by then they had a cost base, they had legacy technology, they're carrying a lot of that, and so to that extent it's an unfair comparison in terms of growth. Now, could they still have actually used that to their advantage and maybe not grown as fast, but maybe consolidated their position? Yes, they potentially could. But I think that kind of brought me to another observation, which was meeting people in Silicon Valley and in Yahoo, and of course Google. You meet people when you're out there. It was a different culture. It felt like the Yahoo team were more kind of the chilled out Californians, let's put it like that, and the Google felt a bit more New Yorky. And it's quite intangible, but there was a different feel at both companies. And was I surprised when things drifted? I think I wasn't. Was I disappointed? Of course I was. There was a load of smart people at Yahoo and a load of really, really, really kind of interesting things going on, but it had become big and it wasn't as focused as a small place. So yeah, I think it felt like things were going in that direction, and all the good work that me and my teams and other teams were doing kind of wasn't enough to turn the ship around with all of those headwinds and so on. But I think it's still, the fact you mentioned it with its golden years, and I think there's a lot of people who work in the web industry who are really kind of proud of that time when they were at Yahoo, and some of the most influential people still around today were there at the time. And I think we all feel that it really kind of started the internet out in a good way, and it has that legacy still. And it's not seen, I don't think, as a kind of a failure. I think it's seen as a really important step in the history of the internet, and I'm really proud that I was there at that time.
So you were there. You were there right at that big change. Then, I mean, just as Google, it sounds like just as
I
Google
was.
were really starting to change the industry or change search, and now of course we see ChatGPT, and all of a sudden we're at another really. I think there's a major inflection point coming now, right? Where I mean, I talk to people who go, they answer things in meetings, and they're like, I went to ChatGPT. They didn't go to Google, right? And I think
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
lot happening under the surface, and it's very interesting to see that sort of suddenly happening now. How does that make you feel, seeing another rather big inflection point?
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of analogy to draw. I mean, yes, certainly. Am I surprised? No, because it certainly feels that all my career working in the software industry that it's constantly changing. Yes, sometimes that does coalesce around a short period, a lot of change in a short period of time, but it's not, it's no different, I think, to when Web 2.0 came along and people were able to interact online in a way that they couldn't previously. So on social media, these things have been big changes, and yes, absolutely, I agree. AI is absolutely one of them, for sure. And we are, as of course everybody is, kind of looking at how we can harness that for good. Within MPB, we've got some really exciting ideas there. But I think it's, with regard to search, of course, yes, people are now comfortable using whatever tool is right for them, and certainly nowadays, for kind of more text-based, interactive, conversational search, then of course ChatGPT and other ones in the future are the right approach. I think we all probably can see it's in its infancy. We noticed recently, for a role we had open, we had a lot of very similar covering letters for the role, and so we went to ChatGPT and put some
Yeah.
things in. Of course, it came out with this covering letter we'd seen. So, but I don't think that will always be the case. In some months or years' time, I suspect it will get a lot better, kind of quite quickly, to the extent we won't be able to tell it. But then, is that a problem? I think it's a really interesting philosophical question, isn't it? One of the use cases we're exploring is auto-generated draft emails for our customer experiences to send. Customer experience professionals to send to our customers. We would never send those out without checking those, because the customer experience professionals are absolutely should be and will continue to be the arbiters of how we communicate with our customers. It may save them some time. Now, over time, will that get better? Will they be editing less? I would expect that to be the case, but will we ever replace them? No, I don't think that's something that we would expect to see, especially with a high touch company like MPB, which is what you need at the end of the sector that we're in terms of the value of the equipment that we buy and sell. So yeah, I think it will. There are many use cases that everybody, and us included, are looking at. I think it is an inflection point, but whether it will be any more transformational than all the other ones that we've touched on, I don't know yet. Interesting to watch it, I think.
Yeah, and so Sophie, right now at MPB, how many people are you in tech?
Yeah, so in product and engineering, we're around 60 across that. We will
60,
continue to grow.
okay.
Yeah, 60, 65, including the design and designers, product designers, and the site reliability engineers, and the IT professionals who look after our laptops. So we have kind of quite a diverse roles.
That's a sizable team already. And like, how do you've also worked, leading 30, 40 people at American Express, if I'm not wrong. And how did you see over time to the challenges of, of leading people like that and large teams
Yeah.
where you don't necessarily know everyone?
Yeah, so I think I must need to update my LinkedIn. When I left American Express, when I was at the VP of engineering there, I think my team was about 120. But some of those were contractors actually, so possibly to 1/3 or something, or 40%. So yeah, similar size to the product and engineering team. I have a product partner, the chief product officer. So some of that 65 report into her.
Yeah.
I'd say my director around sort of 45. But the numbers is not the point. Yes, how do you get to a stage when you don't know everybody? Yeah, it's interesting. I think even at 40, 50, 60, 70, and unless you're scaling so rapidly, which frankly with the lack of talent in our industry, it's hard to scale so quickly that you're having 20 people starting every week. People are joining one by one, aren't they? You always can just take time to say hello to people, right? I mean, that's 5 minutes, however many new starters you have, so at least you have that small connection to people. I think one of the interesting challenges that I found as I've become more senior is managing managers and their managers, because I read somewhere, and I really agree, that a senior executive, a large part of what they should be doing is ensuring communication up and down through their organization, through their vertical, well, throughout the entire organization really as well, in terms of business strategy. But and that of course becomes harder as you get bigger, and you rely more and more on your managers to ensure that the messages that you're trying to inculcate in your team in terms of culture and ways of working, that they are regularly getting there. So I found that kind of scales quite well, having engineering managers who are who are really behind you, really share your strategy, and are good communicators to their team. That kind of is a way of scaling your voice. There's things as well, such as skip levels, which I try and do regularly once a quarter, just so that without the managers in the room, that the team can ask me directly. I try and sort of create touch points. So particular projects that maybe I'm more interested in or sponsoring in more, I ask for presentations from the people doing the work rather than coming up through their management line. So I have an opportunity to kind of interact with them day to day. I think it's really just about finding as many touch points as possible, online or offline, Slack or whatever. We're hybrid like a lot of people, so we're in the office 2 or 3 days a week. So it's just ensuring that out of those times you can also have team meetings and so on. So yeah, it's just something. I think the more you can think about it and as many touch points as you can find, the better.
Well, I think one of the key things, though, so I was trawling through some of your articles on Medium, and one of the things that you said was, to quote, you said, the ability to communicate effectively at all levels is often the hardest thing to teach and is increasingly important as you progress through your career. And I think that's incredibly true and important. So how do we fix it? How do you improve people's communication skills? I mean, especially for managers, middle managers, those kind of people.
Yeah, I think it's partly really setting an expectation that's important, which to me goes without saying, but actually not everywhere I've worked has prioritized that. So that's really the first point. That's setting the culture out, isn't it? It's also having enough people who are good at it within your organization that you can point, or within your your vertical, that you can point to their skills, and in a way that inspires others, and really showcasing the work they've done, and linking and labeling their good communication with the impact they've had within their teams as well. Formal communication training, I've not had a huge experience of that. That's something we're actually going to be trialing quite soon. Within a few hours, there's a couple of the team where I think would benefit from that formal training. So we're looking into that as well. And then also it's just practice as well, I think. Having key messages and repeating them often. We say over communicate quite a lot. And talk about the rule of 7. So having to say things 7 times before they stick in, and before people remember them, as habit. also recognizing there's different ways that people respond to communication, so text, spoken,
Yeah, I was going to say there's different ways people prefer to receive it, isn't there? And
exactly.
yeah,
Text, visual, and spoken. For months when I started at MPB, I was absolutely, I could not believe there were no diagrams, and we were talking about system decomposition and platforms, and there were no boxes drawn, and I had a bit of a penny drop moment that's because the people who should have exposed, they didn't communicate in that way. They communicated in a different way. So we had to have the conversation about, well, actually what I like when talking about platforms is a visual representation of it, and that works for me. But also, if we need to also document it in words, let's do that as well. So it's just thinking about all of those tips and techniques you might use.
I would like to go a bit more technical now. We've spoken a lot about, relations and managing people and interacting and the bigger picture. But in terms of your technical choices at MPB, what are they? Was it you who made the choice? Did you inherit them? And what are the biggest challenges they bring to you?
Sure. So I was, when I joined the company 3 years ago, I was the first CTO. The company's been going for, I think, 12 years now, but very much, classic startup route. And after the Series C, it was requested by the investors that came on at that series that a CTO should be brought in, an experienced one, because the company is, of course, reliant on technology, and they needed that senior leadership in place. So that's what caused me to be brought on. So I really inherited quite a legacy platform, because it had, like all startups, kind of grown organically and grown fast and was really, ambitious, and still continues to be. But there was a lot of work we needed to do, and we are still sort of through, working our way through to upgrade some like quite poorly written, actually, monolithic code in a very old version of Python. So we are doing that sort of service by service, or capability by capability, or domain by domain, is probably the best way to describe it. And I'd say, 2/3 of the way through, we did a big push a year ago when we also upgraded all our infrastructure as well. So the actual stability of the platform is really good. We use Terraform infrastructure as code. We're in GCP, and we've really invested a lot in our pipeline. So we have some really great CI/CD with nightly regression testing, which is full coverage. And if it passes above a certain threshold, which we're quite conservative, I think it's 99.6% now, we auto promote. We may get a bit more subtle on that in the coming days and weeks, but yeah, we're shipping a lot and very regularly and multiple times a day, by hand or once overnight if we wish to.
So how do you deal with a CI with so many tests? Because you probably have tests in the tens of thousands now. So
yeah,
how do you deal with to really ship quickly when they all have to run?
Yeah, so the unit tests run sort of on merge, as you'd expect. So we wouldn't get to the stage where we're running regression tests unless they'd passed. We've taken a kind of a good look at our regression suite to ensure we've broken it into two. We have one which is absolutely every path and every edge case and every unhappy path, and then we have one which is the key user journeys, but quite big key user journeys sort of thing, not just quote and check out, but like kind of quite a lot of permutations of those. And that second one is the one that we've invested more in, and that just takes an hour to run now, and then we augment that with the weekly one as well, and then we do some sanity testing on live. And I think we've also got a lot of monitoring and alerting in place. So we use a service level objective approach where we get alerted if a certain percentage of our key journeys are failing. So that kind of gives us quite a very early indication of if there's actually an unintended bug being introduced. And we've also have a production support manager who's doing a really good job, delivery manager, who's running a very tight ship with regard to kind of quickly reacting to production incidents. We actually have very few. So yeah, I think are we taking a tiny risk every time we ship code? Of course. I mean, but we need to go fast, right? And we've got really good rollback in place and so on, and processes in place. So we're really comfortable with that. And we have not had any.
So for that build process, are you using Cloud Build, or do you use something else? Are you using everything on GCP? Are you?
Yeah, we're GCP at the moment. I think we're looking at Cloud Build, and we're going to be potentially moving to that. I've got Jenkins in there as well. So we are using Jenkins for our pipelines and so on. But the actual build bit, we're kind of looking at whether potentially to move to Cloud Build or whatever in the future.
Sophie, so we have a small tradition in the podcast that the guests we have introduces a book they really like, and you send yours in advance, which is Sooner, Safer, Happier by Jonathan Smart, and it's about, so I'll read it here, anti-patterns and patterns for business agility. So what does that mean and why that book?
So when I was at American Express, one of the areas of focus for me was the agile transformation of the organization from a waterfall kind of contractor based, how things used to be done, through to a modern kind of Scrum team, and then latterly scaled agile way of working. And it's absolutely fascinating doing agile at scale. So I've been used to kind of small scale agile before, but doing it at scale, particularly in an environment where compliance is rightly a high focus, and they're used to checking every box before every launch. And when you're launching little and often less, it's very different. And when you're kind of rightly, again, in a risk-controlled environment, being able to change an organization like that to agile is really difficult. And all of the financial services organizations with the fintechs coming up behind them and snapping at their heels really are focusing on this. And we did a lot of work and a lot of thinking. And John Smart was somebody we worked with when I was there, and I felt that he, having worked at Barclays and really made some amazing impact there in their ways of working, he had some really thoughtful approaches about how to do agile at a large enterprise. And it was interesting, when I came to MPB, I thought, well, this will be a walk in the park compared to American Express. Much smaller team at the time. There was only sort of 18 or 20 people when I started, and a small organization who wants to move quickly. But actually, interestingly, a lot of the kind of process and mindset blockers were there as well. So I've felt I've brought it over with me, I'm going to say. And whilst the compliance aspect is slightly less so in a non-financial services organization, of course, safety and security and data security are really important to everybody. So, there's a lot of relevance there as well. And yeah, I just regularly find myself dipping into the book when I'm coming up across a change management conundrum, and there's wisdom in there. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to read that. It talks about patterns and anti-patterns, which is really helpful, because I think when you're talking to stakeholders about why we need to change, that in a particular area, the anti-patterns really help them understand what we're doing wrong at the moment and why it's a problem, and help paint a picture of how things could change in the future.
Makes sense. No, that's interesting. Gareth?
Yeah, so one of the things, again, I saw reading some of your Medium articles was there was something in there I wasn't familiar with. So you said you were encouraging developers to become T-shaped. Can you explain what that actually means? So I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I never know with some. I mean, as you know, I never know with some of these phrases whether someone I work with invented it or whether it's well used. So T-shape, and there are other sort of shapes, refers to the fact that we want people to become more full stack over time, but not to the extent of everyone being a generalist, because I think within a complex system, that's kind of not possible, really feasible. So the example is a very straightforward one between a back end and a front end developer. So we use Python, as I said, for our back end, and we use React for our front end. And what we say by T-shaped is we want people to be sort of understand the full gamut of the stack, right through for infrastructure through to the front end, but they have a specialized line, the vertical line of the T is their deep specialization, but they can and they can understand and kind of dabble in the others. So to bring that to life, we would say, well, you may not architect and design the coding in the discipline that isn't yours, but you might be able to go in and fix a bug, and that would just potentially be quicker in terms of a small tweak you needed to make, or at least speak to the front end coder a developer in the way that they understand, and so on. So we do try and encourage that. And it's really interesting. Some people are really, really, really embracing that and see it as a great opportunity to become kind of more rounded technically. Whereas others, their identity is very much a back-end engineer or a front-end engineer. And there's, personally, just, it's not right for them. And you kind of don't want to push it too much because, it's their chosen career. Equally, I can see the business benefits of it. Yeah, but it's their bit. I can see the business.
Never liked it. I always preferred back-end code myself. I was one of those people. And the other thing I was going to ask you, so you are, and thank you for joining. You're the second person now since we started doing the podcast format. You're the second lady we've had on here. we just released the episode last week with Jarl, which was very interesting. So obviously I'm going to ask you about, the sort of diversity issue in tech. Again, you had written, I think one of your articles was saying, about the fact that there were 14% of women who were taking A-level computer science. And I thought, isn't that really the crux of the problem? I mean, there was something about Google had some targets for engineers, and they got, I think Google are over 30%. It was a really good number, and they were still getting beaten up about this. And yet you're looking at people graduating going, well, it's always going to be hard if you fundamentally don't have enough women that are coming through with qualifications, right? So isn't that where the issue really is?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen the latest Google numbers. I mean, I would say it's the data around this whole area is really hard to collect because it depends how you define it. And if you're defining coders, then 30% would be frankly amazing. I don't think there'd be many female actual hands-on coders left for the rest of us. However, if you widen it slightly to kind of roles which are adjacent.
Google have taken them all then, have they? Basically,
maybe well have done. If it's 30% coders, literally take my hat off and hold my hands up. But if you sort of look at coding adjacent roles, which definitely still have a technical element, such as solution architecture or whatever, I think the further you broaden it out, the better the stats look. But yeah, absolutely, fundamentally, it does come down to, I completely agree, early on. So although I got into computing without that technical background, I did have, as I said, physics, further maths, so arguably kind of a very structured thinking person. But yeah, the more I come to this, the more I think it's at schools that we need to change. I'm a STEMnet ambassador, so part of what I do is go and speak in schools to try and inspire people to think about a career in technology. It's such a great career. You get to be creative, you get to work with smart people, you get to travel, you get to solve real world problems. It's well paid. It's also really, really inclusive, kind industry. So although we have numbers wise definitely much further to go with regards to certain aspects of diversity and gender in this case, actually compared to friends I have who work in other professions, law and so on and so forth, I've barely come across any discrimination as a result of my gender, and I think that's not the same in all professions actually. So it's actually really inclusive and kind. I think all engineers are kind people.
I think that's probably true. And one of the things Jarl said, which I also agree with, is that there's also the thing about it starting from a young age about what we sort of push children towards being interested in. And it was interesting because my wife said something to me a few years ago, which I'd never thought about. I think a company I was at, I was being beaten up, and I'm exaggerating, I'm saying that for effect, by the head of HR. You need more women in your engineering team. And I was telling my wife, and she said, when was the last time you saw a man in HR? Which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I do think a lot about this. I have a son, and it was really interesting. I was not expecting his early interest in vehicles, and I really challenged myself to give him a gender neutral upbringing in terms of offering all types of toys. And I have to say that I think there was something innate in him, but I think that means we need to try much harder, therefore, to help women understand that there are all the good things about the profession. So I don't think it's 100% society. I haven't heard Jarl's podcast. I'm going to listen to it after this, definitely. But I think yes, we almost have to overcompensate for what is perhaps there already, because I think society kind of sees that potential innate way of thinking that you see more of in men, not entirely, and it sees that and kind of goes with it, whereas actually I think we should maybe recognize that and try even harder to compensate for it. I'm not sure. I think it's a really interesting area of research, actually. I really wish someone would look at it a bit more and kind of see.
That makes sense. I mean, on these kind words and note of optimism, thank you, Sophie, for coming today in the podcast and taking the time to speak to Gareth and myself.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to meet you both, and they were some really interesting questions.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Great. Bye.
And to everyone listening, we will be back in 2 weeks as usual. Thank you. Bye-bye.